For most of modern American history, owning a home has come with an asterisk. You can do everything right, work overtime, buy the place, raise your kids there, pay the mortgage down to zero, and then like clockwork, an annual bill shows up that reminds you who really has leverage: the tax authority. Miss that bill, and the same system that told you to build wealth through homeownership can ultimately force a sale of the very asset you already paid for. That's why property tax isn't just another line item. It lands differently. A mortgage is a contract you chose. Property tax is a permanent subscription on ownership. It turns a paid-off home into something closer to a long-term lease, with the county as silent partner. Now here's the shift. Across the country, the idea that property taxes are untouchable is cracking. Not everywhere, and not all at once, but the taboo is gone. In at least 10 states, serious political movements are underway to eliminate property taxes entirely in some form, or to push them toward zero for primary residences, seniors, or other core groups. Some of these efforts are campaign platforms, some are bills, some are ballot measures, and some are structural reforms that quietly move the state in the same direction. And if even a few succeed, the ripple effects won't be small. They'll hit the housing market, retirement decisions, migration patterns, local government power, and the definition of ownership itself. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through the 10 states where the push is most real. And then I'm going to tell you what nobody wants to say out loud. Eliminating property taxes isn't only a money question. It's a power question. Because property tax is more than revenue. It's control. Why property tax feels different. Sales tax hits you when you buy something. Income tax hits you when you earn. Property tax hits you because you stayed. And that matters especially for men who think in terms of responsibility and stability. You don't mind paying your share. You do mind being cornered. Property taxes are usually enforced with the hardest penalty in the civilian system: the forced sale of a home. That's not theory. It's baked into how the tax lien process works. It's the one bill where "I'll catch up next month" can turn into "I don't live here anymore." And it also creates a specific kind of pressure. It punishes improvement: renovate, expand, maintain, and you can raise your own tax bill. It punishes neighborhood success. Your income can stay flat while your area gets hot, and the tax bill rises anyway. It punishes aging in place. Retirees on fixed incomes get squeezed out of homes they've already paid for. So when people say, "You never truly own your home," they're not being dramatic. They're describing the reality of a tax structure that can override the deed. That's why the pushback is growing, and why the states leading it all tend to share one thing: alternative revenue, energy, tourism, massive sales tax bases, sovereign wealth funds, or just political momentum strong enough to try a constitutional rewrite. The 10 states where property tax abolition is moving from fantasy to strategy. 1. Texas, the big prize. Because the math is enormous, Texas has long been the state that brags about no income tax while quietly hammering homeowners with some of the highest property taxes in America. The reason Texas matters is scale. If Texas can seriously move toward ending major categories of property tax, it will normalize the idea nationwide. Governor Greg Abbott has made eliminating property taxes, especially school property taxes, for homeowners, a central part of his push heading into the next political cycle. The point isn't subtle. Texans are tired of being told they're free while paying a second mortgage to the county every year. The argument Texas supporters make is straightforward. Texas has a giant and growing consumption economy. Texas has relied heavily on property taxes for school funding. If you shift funding to consumption-based revenue and lock in spending discipline, you can stop taxing the roof over people's heads. The counterargument is also straightforward. Sales taxes can be regressive. Local governments don't want to surrender their most reliable revenue stream. Replacing school funding is politically explosive, but Texas is still the lead domino for one reason. When people think property tax revolt, Texas already feels like the natural home of that fight. If Texas moves, other states will copy the blueprint, whether it works perfectly or not. 2. Wyoming, the rewrite the rules state. Wyoming is one of the clearest examples of a state where eliminating property taxes is not just rhetoric, it's actively being shaped into policy. Wyoming lawmakers have considered proposals that would eliminate residential property taxes and replace the revenue elsewhere, and the conversation has grown serious enough that it's been discussed in terms of major structural change, including constitutional level questions. Wyoming's advantage is obvious: a small population and substantial revenue tied to natural resources and related tax streams. That gives lawmakers room to experiment. But there's a deeper cultural angle too. Wyoming is the kind of place where ownership is personal. It's land, not just an address. In that environment, the idea that the government can effectively threaten your homestead over an annual bill is politically radioactive. The big risk, of course, is volatility. Energy markets move. But Wyoming is precisely the kind of state that says, we'll manage volatility before we accept permanent extraction from homeowners. 3. Florida, where property tax elimination became a headline-level idea. Florida has been a magnet for retirees and working families for decades because it pairs lifestyle with a tax-friendly reputation. But here's what changed. Property taxes became the pressure point, especially as home values rose and migration surged. The result is that eliminating or dramatically restructuring property taxes is now openly discussed at the highest political levels in Florida, including talk of constitutional amendment routes. Florida is the clearest example of a state trying to use its unique cash engine tourism to cushion residents. There have been legislative fights over redirecting certain tourism-related tax streams toward property tax relief as well. Florida's pitch is simple. Tourists come, spend, and leave. Residents stay. So shift more of the burden to transient consumption. The warning is equally simple. Local governments depend heavily on property tax stability. Replace it with sales tax. Sounds good until the economy slows. But Florida keeps pushing because the political demand is real. People move there for freedom, and being priced out by property taxes contradicts the brand. 4. North Dakota using oil wealth to end the annual bill. North Dakota is one of the most interesting states in this story because the conversation is tied to oil wealth, sovereign-style funds, and direct homeowner relief. In late 2025, the state highlighted a primary residence credit program that significantly expands property tax relief for tens of thousands of households. And state leaders have explicitly framed the long-term goal as eliminating property taxes for more households. This matters for one reason. It shows how abolition can happen in stages. First, you stop treating property tax relief like a symbolic rebate. You make it structural, recurring, and politically protected. Then you expand it until the question flips from "should we do this?" to "why would we ever go back?" North Dakota's advantage is the same as Wyoming's. Natural resource revenue creates a funding alternative that doesn't require squeezing homeowners. The fight, as always, is about dependency. What happens when oil revenue dips? Supporters argue that if the state can build smart reserves and keep the policy disciplined, homeowners shouldn't be the shock absorbers for commodity cycles. 5. Tennessee. The quiet model. Reimburse and neutralize. Not every state is trying to swing a sledgehammer. Some are using a scalpel. Tennessee's property tax relief programs for qualifying seniors, disabled homeowners, and disabled veterans are state-backed and designed to reduce the effective burden, sometimes dramatically, through relief mechanisms and reimbursements. Here's why Tennessee belongs in this top 10, even though the rhetoric is less explosive. Because it demonstrates the strategy many states will actually follow. Protect the most vulnerable homeowners first, seniors, disabled, veterans. Expand relief. Normalize the idea that property tax can be offset or eliminated for core residents. Gradually shift the burden elsewhere. This is how abolition happens without calling it abolition, until one day the numbers are so lopsided that property tax becomes something other people pay. 6. South Dakota. The clearest abolish it ballot-style push. South Dakota is one of the most direct examples in the country of a formal effort to repeal property taxes entirely through a constitutional route and replace them with another consumption-style mechanism. A proposed initiated constitutional amendment has been framed explicitly as abolishing property taxes and replacing them with an alternative retail transaction tax structure. This is the purest form of the property tax rebellion, not trimming around the edges, not carving out exemptions replacing the system. The trade-offs are obvious. Property tax is stable. Transaction-based revenue can swing with consumer activity. A retail transaction tax reshapes incentives and could shift the burden. But South Dakota's appeal is that it has a long history of low-tax identity. When a state has already built its brand around minimal government drag, abolish property taxes becomes a logical next step, not a crazy idea. 7. Alaska. The state that already proved resource wealth can replace taxes. Alaska is unique. It's a place where the public already expects resource wealth to translate into resident benefit through the permanent fund dividend system. Alaska doesn't fit the standard model because property taxes are mostly local rather than a simple statewide lever. But Alaska belongs in this conversation because it demonstrates a key concept. When a state has major sovereign-style assets, it can fund public life without taxing residents the way other states do. And the broader political debate in Alaska regularly centers on how permanent fund earnings and related revenue should be allocated to government needs. When people imagine a future where property taxes disappear, Alaska is the proof of concept mindset. Build a durable revenue engine. Use it to reduce the tax burden on residents. Make the state's natural wealth work like an endowment. In a country that tells people to invest for the future, Alaska is essentially saying, so should the state. 8. Kansas refunds that treat seniors like citizens. Not Revenue Kansas runs an official property tax relief program for low-income seniors, Safe Senior, Safe SR, with defined eligibility and refund structure through the state's revenue department. Kansas is important because it represents the Midwestern version of this movement. Practical, numbers-driven, not built on national headlines. In states like Kansas, the argument isn't philosophical first. It's basic. People who spent their working lives paying taxes shouldn't get priced out at retirement. A refund program is a way to prevent forced displacement without blowing up municipal finance overnight. This is how the conversation spreads into normal America, the states that aren't branded as rebels, but still feel the same pressure. 9 Ohio, where abolition talk went from bar stool to ballot strategy Ohio, is one of the clearest examples of property tax anger morphing into an organized push to abolish property taxes. A group in Ohio pushed for a statewide vote aimed at ending property taxes, showing that the political appetite exists even in a large, industrial, middle of the country state. Ohio also has active legislative discussions around senior focused property, tax freezes, and broader relief measures. Ohio belongs on this list because if a state like Ohio, big, diverse, not traditionally anti-tax extremist, gets serious about abolition, the movement stops being regional and starts being national. And Ohio's pain point is classic: rising assessments, fixed incomes, people forced to move not because of crime, not because of family, not because of choice, because of taxes. That creates a political fire that doesn't go out easily. 10. Montana tax reform. As a defense of locals against outsiders, Montana's story is the frontier version of a modern crisis. People with modest local incomes watching housing costs explode because outsiders arrived with bigger money. Montana has implemented major property tax changes and relief structures affecting 2025 and 2026 bills, including shifting burdens and designing relief for primary residences while raising taxes on other residential categories. Montana isn't the cleanest abolish property tax tomorrow case. It's something more realistic and arguably more powerful. A state using reform to protect primary residents and preserve a way of life. This is the angle that will matter in many states over the next decade. Not no taxes ever, but your primary home should not be treated like an investment portfolio the government can skim forever. Montana is fighting for the idea that a man should be able to keep his place, his land, his cabin, his family home without being outbid and then taxed out. What happens if these efforts succeed? If even 2 or 3 states make serious progress toward eliminating property taxes, especially on primary residences? Here's what changes fast. The housing market reshuffles. Property tax-free ownership becomes a selling point stronger than granite countertops. Buyers start comparing states like they compare mortgage rates. That means increased migration toward low-tax states, higher demand in those states, and potentially higher prices because when the annual carrying cost drops, buyers can afford more house. Retirement becomes more stable. For retirees, property taxes are often the silent killer. Eliminate them or lock them permanently, and you reduce the biggest threat to aging in place. That's not just comfort, that's dignity. Local government loses a lever. This is the part nobody says plainly. Property tax gives local government power because it's reliable and enforceable. Take away that stream, and local governments must either cut spending, raise other taxes, or accept more dependence on state-level funding. That changes who controls schools, policing, infrastructure, everything. The tax burden shifts, not disappears. And this is where the adult conversation has to happen. The Tax Foundation and other analysts have pointed out the core challenge. Property taxes raise enormous revenue, and replacing them is not simple. You typically shift burdens elsewhere, often dramatically. So the real question is not can we abolish property tax? It's who pays instead, when, and under what rules. Because every tax system is a story about responsibility, and every tax system is also a story about force. The deeper point, Property tax is about whether ownership is real. A nation that tells men to build, provide, and invest should not run a system that quietly treats homeownership as conditional. If you can lose a paid-off home because you missed a tax payment, then ownership is not absolute. It's permission. That's why this movement has teeth. It isn't just about saving a few $1,000s a year. It's about the principle that the home you worked for should not remain permanently vulnerable to a system that can change the bill anytime it wants. Now, does that mean every abolition proposal is wise? No. Does it mean every state can pull it off? Also no. But the direction is clear. The old assumption that property taxes are permanent and unquestionable is dying. Texas is trying to lead with scale. Wyoming is testing structural rewrites. Florida is debating constitutional level moves and revenue redirection. North Dakota is pushing staged elimination through aggressive credits. South Dakota is putting abolition into ballot language. Ohio is showing that anger is national, not regional. And states like Tennessee, Kansas, and Montana are building the practical scaffolding: relief, freezes, refunds, restructuring. So here's the closing truth. For a century, property taxes were treated like oxygen: permanent, necessary, beyond debate. You could pay off your mortgage and still never reach the finish line. Now, across these 10 states, people are drawing a different finish line. They're saying, a deed should mean something. Paid off should mean paid off. And home should not come with an annual threat attached. Because the fight over property taxes isn't only about budgets. It's about whether a man can look at the place he built his life around and say, without fine print, without conditions, without fear, this is mine, and it stays mine.